Hello and welcome to our first class of the course of History of Philosophy. And in this class, I'm going to talk about the rising of philosophy and the Pre-Socratic naturalism. We're going to talk about some philosophers that wrote his theories before Socrates, and Socrates were an important point in history of philosophy because after that we have Plato, we have Aristotle, so we have a big change in the way that philosophy worked. And before Socrates, we had naturalism. That is a group of philosophers that talked about how the nature works. So they wanted to know what is the world made of and how this thing that the world is made of creates the things that we know, creates spoon, creates cup, creates everything. So, but before that, we're gonna study a little bit the rising of philosophy. So, how it started, why it started, what was the context in Greek society, why it happened on Greek and not in any other place. So, first thing, we're gonna talk about the connection between society and philosophy. On this topic, I'm going to analyze just in one way. I'm going to analyze just how society influences philosophy, not how philosophy influences society, because I don't care about society. You know, we're studying philosophy, so I want to know what is the consequences for philosophy. And because of that, I'm just analyzing it in a unilateral way. Then I'm going to talk about Greek civilization, why philosophy started there, what were the aspects of Greek society that influenced people to start philosophizing, doing philosophy, you know. So then I'm going to talk about monism, the early naturalism. So I'm going to talk about the first naturalists, the first people that started to think about the nature, and they created a lot of important concepts that we use until today. So I'm not going to talk about his theories because they are very small, very simple, and not that important, but I'm going to talk about the concepts that they introduced with his theories because this is important. Then I'm going to talk about the two most important figures of pre-Socratic philosophy, that is Parmenides and Heraclitus. I'm going to talk about Heraclitus, his theories, his system. Both of them talks about nature. They are naturalists. All the philosophers that we are studying on this class are naturalists. And Heraclitus has an important theory that influenced a lot of other philosophers among history. Then we have Parmenides, that is particularly one of my favorite philosophers of all time. And I put Eleatus because of his school, the school of Elia. So I'm gonna talk about his theories and how he concepted philosophy, what was his conception on nature that is completely different from Heraclitus. They are kind of the opposite, Heraclitus and Parmenides. And then we're gonna talk about pluralism, the later naturalism post Parmenides that were trying to solve the problems that Parmenides created with his theories. But I'm going to explain it better. And let's start. First, talking about the connection between society and philosophy. The three most important aspects on society that influences philosophy is art, religion, and politics or socio-economical aspects. And the two first aspects are important because they have the same object of philosophy. They, an artist and uh, religious leader, they think about the same thing as a philosopher most of the times. They think about what is right, what is wrong, how human works, if there is something beyond the material reality, and analyzing how a society deals with these topics, with art and with religion. Maybe we can know how the society deals with these topics with reason, And if the way that they concept art and religion makes it easier for the society to use rationality, because now we're analyzing the rising of philosophy. So why it happened on Greece and it does not happen in all other places by that time, in all other ancient civilizations. It was because religion and art made the place good for philosophy. Then we have the socio-economical aspects, and when talking about that, it's important to say that probably is the most important part of these three topics, because it's very common that the material conditions in the society makes people's conceptions different. If you have an authoritarian government that does not let people think with freedom, you're probably not going to have a lot of philosophical projection. But if you have country that is prosperous, that everyone can have a stable life, then you have a country with more philosophical projection, certainly. So it's important to analyze it too. And now, talking about the Greek case, the Greek civilization, we had a very well developed art on Greece. We have the Homeric poems, that is like the Homeric poems are almost the place where we start learning what is literature. If you go to a literature class, probably one of the first things that they're going to talk about are the Homeric poems, because we're the first sophisticated histories with sophisticated characters, and they were coherent. They brought coherent explanations to things and coherent ways of seeing the world. Let me explain what do I mean with that. Because it's not rational. It's still art, but it's coherent in the way that if you're watching a fictional movie and from nowhere in the movie that anyone has superpowers, there are no supernatural thing, someone starts flying, you're gonna say, oh, that does not make any sense. Why did he just started flying? And I could say, oh, the character does not exist. He can fly. He can do whatever he wants. He does not need to be coherent. But on art, the characters need to be coherent. They need to do the things that the story proposes. And on Greek art, we have this. On Greek poetry, we have this coherent explanations and coherent stories, and a rational art, art that people studied this topic and studied the characters, and with that you create a good place for reasoning to develop in general. So we have philosophy from one of the consequences of that. Not only that, but on Greek art, we have the discussion about lots of ethical and metaphysical concepts, such as justice, balance, we have destiny. So, when you say balance here, is like to balance things in your life, not doing something a lot and not having lack of something. The Homeric poems talk about that, talks about justice, talk about destiny a lot, the myths, and the predictions of the people were very rich in that sense, even if they're not doing rational explorations of their topics. Obviously, just thinking about their topics will be good for the birth of philosophy. Then we have religion. On Greek, we had the public religion and we had secondary religions that not everything believed, but we have the Um, but Earthism was the main secondary religion in that time, and it was very important to the development of philosophy too, not just the public religion. So, in the public religion, the most important thing, in my opinion, is the human gods. The gods are almost the same as humans. They are just maximizing human potentials. So, being similar to a god for in ancient Greece were being a human, were making your human characteristics strong, making your human characteristics more than they are, and not, submit, being submiss to gods, being less human to be more God. That's the way how Christians say things, for an example. Human characteristics are different from divine characteristics for Christians. So you need to be less human for you to be more like God. Not all types of Christianism, but in some points of view, we have this conception of God and humans, and we have this relation. But on Greek religion, we didn't have it. So being rational for Greeks were not a bad thing. Being rational, we're not being away from gods, but we're being similar to them. So that's good for philosophy. And in Orphism, we had the duality between soul and body, with an immortal soul and an ephemeral body, with a divine soul and a material body that does not matter a lot. So we had this valorization of the activities of soul. And one of the activities of soul is rationality, is studying, is thinking. So yeah. At last but not least, we have socioeconomic and politics. The word to summarize everything is freedom. In the Athens colonies, we had a lot of freedom, and philosophy started in the Athens colonies, and these colonies were very independent from Athens, and they had intentional commercial activities with other groups. So they had contact with other cultures, with other wisdoms, with other religions, and all this repertoire made the situation good for the philosophers in the colonies. Not only that, but Greek religion had very few dogmas and obligations. Since the Greek religion don't have a holy book, there is no book where it is wrote all the principles that people needs to follow and all the obligations that they need to follow. So it's not that rigid, since Greek religion is mostly oral. So yeah, it's good because people have more freedom to think, more freedom to study in the way that they want, not having to follow any religious dogmas. And we have democracy in Athens because democracy made people start arguing about politics. On Greek democracy, you had to go to assemblies, you had to debate your argument, your conceptions, and you had to convince people, to persuade people to agree with you. And this persuading means having good opinions, having opinions with rational basis. And this political opinions, lots of times need philosophical theories. So that's an important, very, very important aspect to the rising of philosophy. Now, we're going to talk about the philosophers on itself, beginning with Tales of Meletus, the first philosopher, the first naturalist, the first one to talk about arche. I think I'm saying it correctly. I don't know, it's Greek. But arche is the principle that everything is made of and everything comes from. If you have this nail clip and the spoon, both are made of steel, so they share this principle. And the philosophers in the beginning of naturalism wanted to know what is the principle that everything is made of, the principle that everything shares, and what, and then they would find where everything comes from. And Anaximander said that this principle was apeiron. Apeiron means something that is not determinate, means infinite in Greek. And apeiron is the is a substance that is cold and hot, that is both, that is round and flat, that is black and is white at the same time, because it's not determinate. It's not limited by anything. It's unlimited. It's infinite. Absolutely infinite in all the senses. So, how can something be created having this, having apeiron? How can exist? How does I exist? How does the nail clipper exist? How does the spoon exist? And Anaximander will say that it exists with the injustice of these characteristics. We have cold and we have warm in the apeiron. And sometimes the cold can be limited and hot can be limited too. And then we have something that is a little hot because it has more hotness than coldness. Or we have something that is limited both in flat and in round. And then we have something that is round because it's more round than flat. And this opposites, this duels of characteristics that has this injustice creates all the things that we know. And this concept of two opposites fighting, of two opposites creating things and changing reality and being the aspect that everything is based on, this concept is dialectic. Dialectic is one of the most confusing concepts from philosophy. In each author it has different meanings, and but this was the first time someone thought something that is like the way that we understand dialectic. There are various ways of understanding dialectic, but this is one of them, and this is where it was created. Then we have Pythagoras. Pythagoras said that everything is made of numbers. Everything is made of math, relations, patterns, lines, points, squares, triangles, and everything was made of math. But to understand Pythagoras, first we need to understand how Greeks understood math. It's very different from the way that we understood today. If we have two things, we understand that these are just pieces of steel and there is no two here. But Greeks thought that there was two here. Two is a thing that is among us, is not transcendent, and numbers are concepts, not just concepts, but reality. Numbers are objects in reality. We can see it, we can touch the numbers. Now I'm touching two pieces of steel. When we have something that is, if I break it and I have a line, for us, this is just steel. But for Greeks, this is a line. Here I have a line. And having these concepts understood in that way of being realities. And after all the discoveries from Pythagoras, because he discovered that there was math patterns in music, he discovered math patterns in the climate, the seasons. He discovered math patterns in everywhere, and he said, "Oh, okay, it's okay to say that everything is made of math patterns. Everything is made of maths. The organization, the order, the mathematical order is the word, is the substance that everything is made of and comes from. So the word is cosmos. What is cosmos? Cosmos is order in Greek. Calling the universe cosmos is something that we normalized, but Pythagoras was the first person to do that, calling the word order. And understanding the word as something with order and something that makes sense and something that is based on universal laws is very important for history of knowledge, in science, in maths, in philosophy, in all the areas. So I think Pythagoras needs to be studied when talking about monism. Then we have Xenophanes. His most important work is not about naturalism, it's not about monism. I wanted to put it here because I didn't have a better place to put Xenophanes. But the most important part of his theories is saying that God cannot be human. God cannot be similar to a human. If God is the most powerful being that exists, it cannot have a body, for an example, because having a body means limiting. Here you have Camargo and here you don't have Camargo. If I were God, I could not have this body to limitate me, to say where is me and where is not, because everything is me. God needs to be absolutely infinite, needs to be illimited by a body. And obviously, understanding God in this way, he cannot feel anger, he cannot feel love, he cannot feel things. He is not similar to a human in any way because he is completely perfect. That's what Xenophanes is going to say. And that's very revolutionary. That's a conception of God that is so important to metaphysics, that born in Xenophanes. Then we have one of the most important monists. We have Heraclitus. Heraclitus said that the arche is the change, is the becoming. With this, he means that the thing that makes that everything shares, the only thing that everything shares is the difference, is the movement, is not being constant. It's strange because the thing that everything shares, we think of a constant, of something that is equal, not different. Being the identity of things is confusing, but if you understand the way that Heraclitus comprehend things, it's gonna get clearer. So you have me, Camargo now, and you have Camargo now, and these two Camargos are completely different. For Heraclitus, we're all the time changing. And there is no reason to think that me now is the same me as me now. Because I changed. Why this is not me and these two me's in different times are me. They are not. There is no identity. There is no things. There is just movement. And movement is the base of nature. Movement is the base of reality. Identity is an illusion, the same as harmony. And he uses a very good, very, very good metaphor to explain that. That is fire. When you look at fire, you have the thing that is burning, you have oxygen that is being consumed, and we have light being spread. And it's completely chaotic. The thing that is burning is getting smaller. There are smoke, They are the oxygen, they are the light. And when you look at a fire, you see just a flame. And you call that flame a flame, like as if it was one thing. But the flame is simply change, it's simply the movement of light, of smoke, of oxygen. And then you call it flame because it seems that has an identity. But it's not. It does not have an identity. It seems that it has an harmony, that it is not moving, but everything is moving. And it moves in a way that causes the impression of identity and harmony. That's why Heraclitus is going to talk about harmonic chaos. Obviously, there is no harmonic chaos, but in this way, the chaos that brings the sense of harmony. And Heraclitus also says that human soul don't have limits because being changing all the time in random ways in this very intense way means that our soul is free, means that we change all the time into different aspects and we don't have limits, we're not determined by anything, and we are free. And this is a conception that is not about nature, it's about human. But this is an important conception that I think it's good to see how it was created based on this idea that nothing has an identity and everything changes. And because of that, we're free and everything is completely unstoppable. And then we have the hardest part, the most confusing theories, that is Parmenides. He is my favorite monist. He is one of my favorite philosophers of all time. And he opened a school called the School of Ilia, and his students were called Iliatas. So that's why I put here Iliatas, because people who believed on the theories from School of Ilia were called Iliatas. And let's go. The Iliatas created epistemology and ontology. They were the first one to talk about truth, opinions, arguments, principles, and almost invented logic, And they were the first to talk about the being. What is talking about the being? Ontology is the study of being, the study of what we mean when we say that something is something. And Parmenides will say that when we say that something is something, for an example, this is a cup of water. We say that it exists in the form of cup of water. But if we say just that it is the same as saying that it exists. So when he talks about the being, he talks about the existence, that all the things that exist. This is the being. The being is all the things that exist and the existence on itself, because the existence is the existing things. And this is the being. And epistemology is the study of knowledge, so it's the study of truth, is the study of justification, is the study of what is an opinion, what is an absurd opinion. Yeah, that's epistemology. And his book is based on 3 parts. The first part, he talks about the truth. Truth is everything that follows this principle, the principle that the being is and the non-being don't. The non-being is not. It means that the things that exist, and the things that do not exist, don't exist. Just that, I put that it's a precursor of logic because it's almost a formulation of the principle of non-contradiction and almost the formulation of the beginning of logic. Saying that truth is everything that follows this a principle. It's so similar to logic, and it's almost creating logic, but logic is going to be invented just by Aristotle some years later. But okay, this principle says just that. What exists, exists. What does not exist, does not exist. Simple. The non-being is unthinkable and meaningless. It's pure nothingness. The things that does not exist simply does not exist in any way. Like saying that a unicorn does not exist is not true. A unicorn exists as imagination, exists as an idea, but it exists. The thing that don't exist is this. I said it. You cannot say the thing that does not exist because it simply does not exist in any way. It's pure nothingness. Nothingness does not exist. For an example, you cannot think of nothingness when I say nothing. You don't think of anything. It's an empty word. And non-being is an empty word too. We couldn't even say the word non-being because non-being does not exist, in any way. And because of this, the only truth is that the being was not created, the being is immobile, the being is homogeneous, and unique. This is the hard part. What is movement? What is becoming that Heraclitus talk about? For Parmenides, he defines becoming as passing from being to non-being, or passing from non-being to being. As an example, the young Camargo exists. The adult Camargo does not exist. Changing means here you have existence, here you have non-existence. Young Camargo is going to go to existence until non-existence. It's in this state and it's going to be in this state. And adult Camargo is in this state of non-existence and it's going to this state of existence. And when it happens, we have a change. But for the Eleathus, the non-existence does not exist. So it's not possible going from the existence to the non-existence because the non-existence does not exist. So when we have just the existence, movement is not possible. So the being is immobile. When you have this nail clip in this position and then this nail clip in this position, what am I saying if I say that movement happens? I'm saying that the nail clip in this position here does not exist anymore. But saying that something does not exist isn't possible because what does not exist is not even something that you can say. What does not exist at all. So saying that this is moving, the nail clip in this position is now moving from existence to non-existence, and the nail clip in this position moved from non-existence to existence is impossible. So anything moves. Not only that, but the being was not created. It's eternal. Because if it was created, it had to be created by something that is not the being. And it's impossible because everything is the being. The being is defined as the group of everything that exists. And it is homogeneous because you cannot have two different things. You cannot have a nail clip and a spoon, because having two different things means saying that the characteristics of the nail clip does not exist in the spoon, and the characteristics of the spoon does not exist in the nail clip. But saying that something does not exist, as we already said, is impossible, because if I can say something, it's because the something exists, you know? So if everything is the being has to be all the same. The being has to be homogeneous, because if it is different, if inside the being you have different states of existence, means that you have the non-existence of one state in the other state of existence. So you are saying that the non-being exists. What is an absurd? You're saying that the things that does not exist. What cannot be said? It's illogical. And at last, the being is unique, obviously. Okay, this theory is problematic. Very, very problematic. Because the conclusions are completely absurd. The conclusions, like, you cannot even think of how could the being be, you know? It's completely away from what we understand and from the way that we live our practical lives, you know? And the Eliathas know it. And it says, an absurd opinion is the opinion that uses the senses. That just because you see the nail clip moving from here to here, you say movement exists. It's based on nothing. It does not make any logical sense, as we already proved. And these opinions has to be eliminated. As an example, if you look to the sun, you're gonna see that the sun is a lot smaller than Earth. You look to the Earth is giant. You look to the sun is this size. And you say, the sun is smaller than Earth. But if you use logic, you'll see, and if you use science, you'll see that the sun is bigger, a lot bigger than Earth. So you need to avoid these opinions using the senses. But in the end of Parmenides' book, he talks about plausible opinions, and these pages were lost by time. So we could not have the explanation of how could he do this, because it seems very contradictory, because he says that for practical use we need to minimize the admissions of the existence of non-being. He basically says that we don't need to believe in truth, because it cannot it's not practical. But he does not explain how it works. He does not explain why it is not an absurd opinion. So it is not clear, and we cannot talk about that a lot. But he says that in practical use, we cannot believe in the truth. The truth that is, the being is and the non-being is not. Okay, then we have the last state of naturalism, that is no more monism. Until here, we're talking about monists. We were talking about people that believe in an arche. Parmenides believes that the arche is the being. Heraclitus believes that the arche is the movement. And we have the others. Pythagoras saying that it is the numbers. But now we have pluralists. People that believe there was no arche. There was not only one substance that everything was made of, but there were lots of substances. And they were attempting to be against and to say that and to create a theory that follows Parmenides' theories but not being so radical, you know? They understood what Parmenides said about the movement being possible, about the impossibility of passing from being to non-being, and from non-being to being, but they didn't accept it, that truth was so different from what we could see on our senses. And then we have Empedocles and the atomists, Leucippus and Democritus. Empedocles talk about the four elements. He says that love makes the elements stay together and create things, This water is here because love makes the element of water, stay all together and not go to the air or vanish. And hate makes the elements separate, and then things, and then you don't have the thing anymore. If I put fruit without the seeds inside ground, with time, Empedocles would say, hate made the fruit vanish. But things are not vanishing. Anything vanishes. Anything appears from nowhere. It's because the elements are being put together by love or being separated by hate. So he denies that something passes from being to non-being. It's just about the arrangement of the four elements. So here you see the influence of Parmenides in its theories, in how he is against Parmenides too, because he says that the elements can move, the elements can stay together, the elements can separate. And talking about love and hate, it seems strange, the names that he gives to it. But it's similar for what we know as gravity or magnetic fields, It's just forces that attracts and repels the elements. Just that. It's just because the name that he gives is quite strange. It's love and hate. But they are forces, material forces. And then we have atomism. Atomists believe that they are infinite arcays. Like things can be cut and cut and cut and cut until the smallest part that we cannot see because they are so small. And these small balls, small spheres, are similar to the Eleatic being, are similar to what Parmenides called the being. They were not created, they are eternal. Each atom is eternal. Each atom is homogeneous. Each atom is unique. But the atoms can move and they can move faster, they can move slower, they can be more compressed, they can be less compressed, and then you create things, The steel is atoms that are very compressed, and paper are atoms that are less compressed. Air are atoms that are very distant one from the other. And they admit that there is no birth and death. Anything vanishes, anything appears from nowhere. Just atoms getting together and separating, similar to Empedocles. But all the pluralists had to admit the existence of the emptiness, had to admit that there is a nothing, an empty between the two atoms for them to be spread or for them to be compressed. And this emptiness that is between the atoms are not atoms. So they are kind of admitting the existence of non-being and admitting the movement of the atoms. So, because of that, the Eliathas were not pluralists. The Eliathas didn't accept the pluralist theories. They said that they were nonsense because they do not fit in the idea that the being exists and the non-being don't exist. So then we have the context of naturalism, of ancient naturalism. We have the pluralists and we have the monists. The monists being the two main monists being Heraclitus and Parmenides. Heraclitus accepting that there was no identity, so we could not say that there is things that stay with its identity among the time and everything changes all the time. And in the other side of monism, we have Parmenides saying that we need to have the base of our theory in the reasoning and in these principles that you cannot say that they are wrong. The principle is very solid, the principle that what exists exists and what does not exist does not exist. So, and in the other hand, we have pluralists that tried to make some explanations that were more, in the middle of the way between extreme movement that Heraclitus theorizes and the pure being that Parmenides theorizes. They try to make something that can be explained, can explain our senses and our practical life, but is not that extreme as Heraclitus theories. And there we have it. We're done. Our first class is over. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you watch the other classes, and I see you later.